All right, welcome to My Line of Work. Here we dive deep into the world of work, what people do, why they do it, and how they got there. From dream jobs to unexpected paths, every story matters and every career has a story worth sharing. Today, our special guest is Osana González.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Excited.
Go ahead and tell people what you do.
Well, currently, I am a leadership consultant at the Education Service Center, Region 20.
Yeah.
But most recently, I was principal of a middle school on the south side in Harlandale.
Yeah.
Spent 4 years there.
Nice.
And that completed my 10-year term of administration.
10 years.
10 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. So let's go back. So leadership consultant. Before that, you were principal. Before that,
assistant principal. No, academic dean at Southside High School.
Okay.
Deep in the south side.
Yeah.
As south as 281 goes.
Yeah.
That was a long drive. So I was there for 2 years. And then prior to that, I was assistant principal at our alma mater for almost 5 years.
Cool.
And then that's actually where my admin career started.
Okay. There you go. And then before that?
Before that, I was teaching Spanish, high school Spanish, and I was a basketball and track coach.
Nice.
And it's kind of a funny story. So I was at Steele, and we went to state my 3rd year there. And at the same time, I was caring for my brother's 2 children because my sister-in-law got really sick. And she was in ICU for like 6 months. And so when I had the kids, we like kept winning and kept winning and kept winning. But then I was having to like take care of a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old. It was so hard. I was like, how do moms do this?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it was so hard. So then we made it to the state game, and we lost. We got killed by Duncanville.
Yeah.
And so I just remember like after it was all done, it was like the end of December, and just sitting there and being like, man, like I'm sitting in this restaurant, like nobody knows, like we went to state, nobody cares, like, but I know it's a big deal for coaches because it's, I mean, like not that many teams get to go, right? And then I remember thinking like, I felt like I was taking someone's spot, like someone who maybe wanted to be there, or maybe that was their end goal, and it wasn't mine.
Oh, interesting.
It was not mine. And that's when I decided to get my admin certification.
Okay.
And so when I resigned from coaching at Steele, they're like, we love you, but we don't have a position for you. I was like, but I want to stay.
Yeah.
And so then I got the job at Clemens. So they just transferred me over.
Cool. Yeah.
So when I went to Clemens, I started my certification because it's like a 9-month program. And a lot of the coaches that I worked with at Steele ended up becoming administrators that year at Clemens.
Yeah.
So there was like 5 of us.
Yeah.
And so when I transitioned over there, one of the prior coaches, he was my mentor for the program because you have to have a mentor.
Yeah.
And so when I was there, I did my work with him, my internship with him. But then like a week before school started, they're like, we need a basketball coach. And I was like, no, I'm done with coaching. And they're like, we need a basketball coach. And I mean, it was a sweet deal. They gave me like an extra period off. And I was like, and there was one sport. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. And then did that for like a year and a half. And then I got my job at Roosevelt.
Cool. Very cool. Okay. So your journey in education started as a Spanish teacher?
Spanish teacher.
What did you study to become a Spanish teacher?
Well, that's a funny story too. So, so when I was at A&M, I changed my my track, like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times. But I finally landed on international studies. Okay. Right. And it was like a business minor. So it wasn't like the business school, but it was like as close as you could get to it without having to get into the business school. Yeah. So my junior year rolls around and they tell me that coming summer, I would have to study abroad, but I was undocumented. Oh. And so I was like, well, what am I supposed to do? And like, no one ever mentioned this.
How am I supposed to get back?
How am I supposed to, like, where am I going to go?
Yeah.
So I went to talk to my advisor, and so I told her, and she's like, we've never had this. And I was like, well, nobody told me this was a requirement or I wouldn't have selected it, right? So then I told her, I said, what can I transfer to where I don't lose track? Because also I had the scholarship where I didn't have to, well, it was like a loan, but I didn't have to pay it back if I graduated in 4 years.
Oh, okay.
And my citizenship status didn't matter.
Okay.
And
so like a grant?
Yeah, it was a grant. Okay. So then I was like really adamant about graduating on time because I wouldn't have to pay it back. And that's how I was going to school there. And so she was like, well, let's look what this transfers into. And essentially the only thing that would transfer was like a Spanish degree. And I was like, I'm not getting my degree in Spanish. And I said, my mom would be like so mad that we spent all this money. And she's like, well, what about education? And I was like, I always wanted to be a teacher. And I did. Yeah. But when I told my mom that that's what I wanted to do, she was like, well, do you necessarily have to go to A&M to do that? Can't you just stay here? But my heart was set on going to A&M no matter what. Like I was just going to make it work. Yeah. And so, so that's why I initially changed what I wanted to do when I got there. Cause my mom kind of like downplayed it a little bit. Yeah. Like that's all, Yeah. So then I went in as, who knows what, I changed my major so many times. But then, when it led me to this, then I thought like, okay, maybe this was meant to be, right? Because I tried. I really tried other things. Yeah. And this is where I still landed. So then I remember calling my mom and telling her like, Mom, I have to change my degree. Here's why. Yeah. And I said, I'm going to be a teacher. Like, that's what I wanted to. And she goes, but now you know that that's what you want to do. I was like, oh, this was your plan all along. And so I told her, I was like, man, you made me suffer so much. You're welcome. Yeah. And so that kind of took its own path. Cool. Yeah. And I was able to graduate on time. Well, then A&M had this post-bac program where you could get your master's and your teaching certification at the same time. Okay. And so immediately after I graduated, like the program started. And so I was in that program for 2 years. It was because it was a master's. And our last year of the program was your internship, which was like being a teacher, right? Yeah. So the really cool thing about, I mean, you may have heard of it, like the Aggie Network, right? Is that they take pride in making sure that you have a job before you graduate. Okay. And so when we went through the program, there was a class that we took on how to like interview and all of those things as well, preparing us. So they brought in a bunch of administrators from the Houston area, like Cy-Fair ISD, and they were blowing up at that time. Like they were building so many schools. Yeah. So they came in and we just had numbers and like they asked us questions and they're like number 4, number 10, number, whatever. Yeah. And then it would get like smaller and smaller. And by the time we left there, we all had contracts. Wow. So my first teaching job was in Cy-Fair ISD in Houston. And I was there for 2 years. Yeah. And it was honestly really cool. So then when I graduated, I had my master's and that probationary year of teaching turned into like they made you like a teacher after that, but we got paid as like full-time teachers. So the second year in the program, you're teaching and going to classes on Saturdays. Which was only like a 45-minute drive anyway. Yeah. So, but there were so many of us. There were like 60 of us that got hired in Houston, and so a lot of us would carpool back and forth. To class.
Nice, like a cohort.
Yeah, it worked out really nice. Yeah.
Man, that's cool. And then you mentioned you got this grant. Did that pay for all your school?
Most of it.
Okay. Did you have any loans?
No, that was the only one. So my mom, she's a housekeeper still to this day. Yeah. And we worked with some phenomenal people. Like my mom cleaned houses for amazing people. Yeah. And there was this one lady, and she was we called it the Aggie house. So my mom has like nicknames for all the houses that we cleaned. Right? Oh, okay. And so this was the Aggie house. Yeah. She had 7 kids, all went to A&M.
Oh, nice.
And I babysat for them for her kids. Like I would babysit for them. Yeah. And so I remember my senior year in high school, she was like, oh, your mom gave me your graduation. So she would give them graduation cards so that they could give me money. Oh, okay. And so she said, so am I going to see you more now that you're graduating? Like my destiny was to clean houses, right? I said, no, ma'am, I'm going to A&M. And she was like, which one? And I was like, I didn't know there were like other ones. So I was like,
yeah, I just learned that too.
Yeah, I was like College Station A&M. Yeah. oh my goodness, my kids went to school. And I'm like, yeah, lady, like I've been cleaning your house for 3 years, like, and she's like, that's so awesome. And so we started talking about that, and she's like, oh, that's so good. And she was like, I have 2 grandchildren going there. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Nice. and so she was like, well, why A&M? And I said, well, my brother goes there.
Yeah.
She's like, your brother goes there? I said, yes, he's getting his PhD there. And she's like, what? She looks at my mom. She's like, Irma, you never told me. And my mom was like, you've never asked. So that lady ends up giving me $2,000 a semester.
Are you serious?
Yeah. She was like so proud of me.
Wow.
Yeah. So they gave me $2,000 a semester. And her brother-in-law worked at the finance office at A&M. Mm-hmm. So like she would send him the money, they would deposit into my account. So it could only go to my school. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So that obviously helped. And back then, I mean, that was a lot. That's like tuition was way less than it is now. Oh, okay. And so, and then this other couple my mom worked for, this Jewish couple, they had 2 kids, but their kids like didn't go to college. And he was a doctor. He was a gynecologist, Mr. Powerstein. Yeah. And they like always felt like they had all this money saved up for their kids, and their kids didn't like do much. And I think one of their sons overdosed and like passed away or something. So she was like, we're so proud of you. And they were like, we would go clean, and they'd sit us down to eat breakfast, and like, like they were so awesome. Man, so they gave me money for school.
Wow, that's so cool. Mm-hmm. So yeah, this channel is obviously about careers and stuff, but I was able to graduate college without any debt. I got a grant.
That's awesome.
And that's actually how I switched from engineering to education, was through a grant. But just, I don't know if you can talk about my experience of graduating debt-free and the opportunities that created in my life. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that. Just being able to graduate, no debt, no student loans, you make money, and it's...
what's crazy is that I just thought that's how it was.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I remember one of my roommates from college talking about how she didn't think her parents were going to be able to pay for like one of her semesters, and that her student A had already gone through. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was never eligible for it, so I didn't know what that looked like, right? And so I remember her telling me how much it cost, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm paying twice as much. Yeah. So then did some research, and like I told you, that lady's brother-in-law worked at the finance office. So I go to see him, and it turns out, like, I guess when I initially applied to A&M, like it asks you those citizenship questions. Yeah. And so they didn't have me down as a resident of Texas. Okay. They had me down as an international student. So they were charging me twice as much. Wow. And we had already paid 2 years of that. Yeah. So then I told him, like, I was like, so what can I do? Because I'm a resident. So, I mean, they had my transcripts and everything, so they were able to verify it. Yeah. So essentially, my last 2 years were paid for because we had already paid them. Wow. So they credited it back. Interesting. But when I got my master's, my brother had already graduated with his PhD. And then my little sister went to A&M, Susie. Okay. So then my mom was like, Mija, like, I can't pay 2. Yeah. I can't pay for 2 of y'all. Like, I did your 4 years, like, and so I was like, that's fine. This is my first time taking out a loan. Okay. And by then I was a citizen, so I was eligible. Yeah. So I took out a loan, but I took out like just what I needed. Yeah. My mom paid for like housing, all of that. So just to pay the tuition, which was way cheaper because it's just the master's program. Yeah. So when I graduated from my master's, and mind you, that second year of my master's, I was already working. Okay. So I was paying it down while I was teaching. Oh, okay. And so when I graduated from my master's, that following year, I paid off like the second year of my loan. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I only ended up owing like $5,000. Yeah. And I paid it off pretty fast. Man, but that was going back to like being debt free, right? Like I was never eligible for credit cards. Yeah. I didn't have any of that stuff. Okay. So when my first job, I think, I don't know, maybe I was making like 51 to 55 or something, but it was a lot of money back then, right? And it could go far. So So I was just like throwing it all at that loan. And like within my first year teaching, I was debt free.
Man, that's awesome. I love those stories. I have a friend that just a couple years ago, his 30th birthday was coming around. And he's an estimator. I don't know if you know what that is. It's a construction job. And he was like, my goal is to pay off my student loans before I turn 30. Right. And he graduated at 22. So he'd been working for 8 years and he's like, I want to pay off these student loans. And he wouldn't go out to eat. He was just focused. I'm like, man, 30 years old. Yeah. Still has student loans.
Right. It's like, what? This is a thing.
Crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. And then all the certifications I've gotten since then, I've only done it if I had the money.
That's good.
Like I never, like my doctorate. Like I told myself that if I had the money to do my doctorate, I would, but I would never take out loans for it. Yeah. And then my house burned down. Okay. So then I had the money. Which is like, so I should be graduating.
God was like, here you go. I'll get you that.
But God's like, I'll take care of that for you. Yeah. And so when all of that happened, I was like, well, I have the money now to go back to school and get my doctorate. So that's what I'm working on now.
Interesting. Very cool. And so what is your doctorate in?
It's in educational leadership.
Oh, okay. Cool. Is that going to help what you do now?
So it's crazy, right? Because I've always known what I wanted to do and I've always been very driven in my career. And life happened the last 4 years and was very tough. And I think that I used when I was principal, like that was kind of my escape from what was happening in my personal life. Okay. Gave me purpose, right? And so I had to get up in the morning and be happy and put on a smiley face and be there for my kids and my staff. But after, so they call it the cliff of despair, right? Okay. Where you're like in survival mode, and you're doing it for somebody else, and so you're like, I can do this, and then you get to the cliff, and you're like, can't do this anymore, right? Yeah. And I think I reached my cliff of despair year 3, but I stayed one more year, and then was able to like walk away from it the following year, like knowing like this is okay. So I have my superintendency. Okay. I have like, that was my ultimate goal, right? Nice. But I decided to take like a step back and back by like off of campus. Yeah. Because I think I needed to take some time to really focus on my personal life and like what that means to me and like what purpose I have in my personal life. Yeah. Because for me, it was always my career. Like that gave me purpose. But I learned year 3 that could be taken away so easily. Yeah. And then what do you have, right? Yeah. And so that's when I realized like, man, I have to have purpose in my personal life to make it more meaningful versus just, this is my career, and this is what I do. That's awesome. And so, so I took this job at Region 20. That's like a normal job. Like I get a lunch. Yeah. I haven't had a lunch in 16, like a lunch hour. Yeah. I haven't had a lunch in 16 years, like, because even like when I was coaching and teaching, like you were coaching during your lunch, like you were getting ready for your coaching period or whatever, or your grading or. Yeah, you're still. Yeah. You don't ever get to step away. Yeah. I eat slow. And so my first couple years teaching, I would never finish my lunch. Because it's, like you said, it's 30 minutes. I taught elementary. Yeah. So part of those 30 minutes is walking the kids to the cafeteria. And then by the time you get to the teacher's lounge or the classroom, you eat. But then 30 minutes, you got to go pick them up, right? And so I would never finish my lunch. Yeah. And as an administrator, like, you don't get a lunch, right? Oh, really? So you're just like, when I was principal, I ate with my 6th grade kids. And so it was the first lunch. So I would go like sit with the kids that were by themselves. Oh, okay. And so, and the cafeteria ladies never charged me. I don't know if I should be saying that, but they were like, I would do like a fake code on the keypad and then I would take my lunch and then I'd go sit with the kid. That's awesome. Yeah. So that was like the only time I got lunch, but I was at lunch duty. Yeah. It wasn't like I got to go be away. Wow. So principals don't have like a... No, hombre. No, they say like, right, everybody gets a 30-minute duty free.
Yeah.
But so the way I did it was there were 3 of us and there were 3 lunches.
Okay.
No, sorry, there were 4 of us and there were 3 lunches. And so I remember what it was like being an assistant principal and dealing with discipline all the time and being an academic dean and dealing with testing all the time.
Yeah.
So I would give my 2 administrators or my 3 administrators, I would make them work 2 lunches and take 1 lunch off. Okay. But we would call it like the office hour or the office lunch. And they would have to be available in case a parent came in during lunch to attend to that parent.
Yeah.
But that was like their time in the office to like just have 30 minutes. And if no parents came, then cool, then you had a lunch, right?
Yeah.
And most of them were working through it anyway, while the rest of us were at duty. Okay. So I actually worked all 3 lunches so that my administrators could have like that free lunch.
Oh, nice.
But
that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, cool. I remember what it was like to be be in their shoes, and those 30 minutes helped.
Yes. I wanted to talk about, so I think we kind of grew up similarly. My parents were, when it came to my career, it was always what pays the most, right? Because my parents in Monterrey were very poor. So then when we moved here, obviously for opportunity, my parents were like, engineer, doctor, lawyer, like just things that pay well, because they and understandably they were like, we don't want you to struggle financially the way we struggle financially. Right. So just get a job, go to college so that you can get a career that pays a lot of money. Okay. Never the conversation of like, what are you good at? What are your strengths? What are you passionate about? No. Those conversations were like, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And in fact, when I switched from engineering to education, which I credit that to my brother, who was already an engineer, who encouraged me in that path. My mom was like, you're going to be poor. Like, no, you're going to struggle. Like, that was her fear. She's like, oh my gosh, like teachers don't make a lot of money. You're going to be poor. Like, right. So I don't know if how your experience with, growing up, what was the message told to you as far as like careers?
Well, 100% the same, right? Because when I told my mom I wanted to be a teacher, that's her initial reaction was like, so do you have to go to A&M to do that? Like, can't you just stay here? Yeah. Right? So to me, that told me basically what you're saying, right? Yeah. And so I went for an engineering. I think I was an engineer for a semester. No, really? Didn't work out. And so that goes back to that, right? But then like also as I've progressed in my career, it's to my mom, it's been like I like a proud moment. Like I can tell people my so when I became principal, I'm gonna forget it. Like my daughter's a principal, my daughter's right. So everybody like she would tell, and it's so funny because like when I met my mom's doctor for the first time, her kidney doctor, she was like, "Oh, are you the principal?" And I was like, "I am," but like so that was my mom's like thing, right? Like for me. Yeah. And I remember when I told her that I was not gonna go back for my principalship, that I was like done with that part of my career. She's like, "What are you gonna do now?" And I was like, "Well, I'm still gonna be in education. I'm just not gonna be a principal. So what do I tell people?" Right? And so I was like, "Well, I don't care what you tell people. Like this is," but it goes back to that, right? And with the title comes more money. Yeah. Right. So my mom's second question was, "So what about the money?" Yeah. And I told her, "But like, Mom, like, why does how much money I make matter to you when I take care of my own life?" Right. So she was just like, "Well, you work this hard to get this far, and then you're not going to make the same amount of money." And I told her, but in education, with the more money you make, the more responsibility. Yes. And like, that's what I want to get away from. Yeah. Right. And so I took a $17,000 pay cut. Dang. I did. And it hasn't been an easy transition. Yeah. But to be in a place where like I have normal work hours and I get a whole hour for lunch just to like chill. Yeah. And I'm not responsible for anyone but myself. Yeah. I haven't had that feeling. That's good. I think ever in my career. Because even when you were a teacher, you were responsible for your classroom, right? And the kids in your classroom. So I don't think I've ever had that.
Yeah.
So the peace that comes with taking that pay cut has been worth every single penny.
That's awesome. That's good. I think that's a good message. To like, it's not always about the money. Right? It's nice.
And it drives people.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I had a similar experience twice. Not as drastic as that. It wasn't 17,000, but I went from a district to a different district. At the time I was working on Northside, which at the time I was there was the highest paying district. And then you get a stipend because it's bilingual. I went from Northside to Judson. And
that's a pay cut.
And it was a pay cut, one. And then two, people that had worked at Judson were like, don't go to Judson, it's terrible. And they just didn't have a good experience at Judson. But at Northside, and this is just the campus I was at, it wasn't a true bilingual program. It was mixed. I had 21 students, okay? Half of them were just regular monolingual students. And then the other half were bilingual students. And then the other fourth grade teacher, same thing. I was like, why don't you just have one bilingual teacher with it was really weird. So I had to do, all of my lessons were in English, right? But then I had the small group, my English kids, and then I had the small group, my Spanish kids. But then my Spanish small groups was reteaching the lesson because I did it all in English. Because they didn't get it. And then small grouping the kids, it was a mess. Yeah. I didn't like it. I left. I went to Judson. I ended up loving Judson, which everyone was like, no, Judson's not. I loved it. And I think, kind of going back to what you talk about, the kind of principal you were, I had an awesome principal at Judson. In fact, she still reaches out to me every couple of years. She's like, hey, you ready to come back? And and if I were to ever go back to teaching, I would go back to her. Yes, wherever she is. Like, she was just awesome principal. Why did we bring that up? I forgot why we brought that up.
We were talking about the pay cut.
Oh yeah. So I wasn't making as much money. I think it was like a $3,500 pay cut, which, at the time was a lot. My wife's stay-at-home mom. Yeah. We're on one income. I have 4 kids. It was a lot for us, $3,000. It's like a month worth of pay for us. But like you said, like, it was worth the transition. They had a true dual language. There was dual language, right? So now it's just, all the kids are learning English, learning Spanish. I loved it. And then I had a similar experience. I worked now I'm a home inspector, right? When I started, I was working for a company. Right. And I was making good money, but I was doing 3 inspections a day. I was doing a lot.
You had to meet quotas.
There you go. Right? Yeah. I was working Sunday through Friday. When I was hired, they told me I was going to be working Monday through Thursday. But to meet the quotas, I'm available Sunday through Friday, and I only have Saturdays off. My wife, thankfully, she was like, hey, I think you can do this on your own. You should start your own company. So she encouraged me to start my own company. And there's been times where we don't make as much money, but I'm like, I've been able to do this, start a YouTube channel. I've been able to, because we lived on a teacher income so long, I'm like, we don't have to make a lot of money.
Right.
And now she has a part-time job on the side. It's like you said, the peace.
The peace that comes with it.
Even though we're not like rich and making all this money, it's like, well, I can go have lunch with my kids. I can take my kids to school, pick them up from school. Like, just the benefits.
The things we never had, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was telling my son, he played soccer, and his friend's parents didn't go. And so he had to go home on the bus. And he made a comment about that. And I was like, and then he asked me if my parents went to my games. I'm like, never, not one game.
Not one.
And I've never missed my son's games, like, ever. Yeah. Right. And so just that, I think when you pick a career and when you think about work, like, because I don't think you can ever achieve like a true balance, right? Because sometimes there's times where, like, when I was in college, it was just all about school, right? But yeah, now I have that. I've achieved a balance where I work just enough, and I have enough time for the most important things, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so funny because you know the neighborhood I live in, right? Because you did my home inspection.
Yeah.
But when I'm leaving to work so early in the morning, and I see moms in their little go-karts driving their kids to school, I'm like, I will never get to do that because I'm the one receiving your kid, right? So like, I when I would drive to work, I used to be like, man, I could never do that, and I would never be off in time to pick up my kids, you know, if I wanted to. And so I just like those are some of the things that started really like hitting home, as I got deeper into my principalship, and those are the things where I was like, man, like what really matters to me, like right now in my life, is it me, my personal life, or this career that like I felt at the time gave me purpose.
Yeah.
It's a tough decision.
Yeah, it is. It's important to think about. Okay. So your route was teaching, administration. Now, now you're doing, say what you do again?
Leadership consultant.
Consulting. Okay. To be a consultant, what degrees are required or what?
So actually everything I did was like a requirement for this job.
Okay.
So you had to be a principal for at least 3 years. Superintendency preferred, but not required. Okay. I think it was at least 6 years of admin experience.
Okay.
And so while there was that pay cut, right?
Yeah.
The advantages of being able to still like apply what I've learned and what I've done to this job was like, man, like, and I mean, just going down like the job description, I was like, yes. And how often can you say like you have all the requirements? And I remember thinking like, this is me. Like I've done all of these things. And so, it's so funny because when they call to give you the job offer, they're like, you're not going to make as much. And I'm like, but it's on your website. Like, I know what I was signing up for, And I'm like, yes, I know. And they're like, but you won't be responsible for anyone. You won't have any duties, any extracurriculars. You won't have this. You won't have
an hour
that.
Lunch.
Yes. You get to pick my schedule, And so I was like, I was sold when I applied. Like, you don't have to sell it to me.
And how did you find this job?
Well, so ESCs are like throughout Texas, they're in every region, right? Yeah. So there's 20 of them, and we're region 20. So if you are ever in education and looking for a job, if you go to your ESC's website, or even like if you have to move, like let's say your husband gets a job in a different city and y'all are moving, and you're in education, look for your ESC, and they list all the jobs in that region, right? Okay. And so at first I was looking for principal jobs.
Okay.
I thought maybe I just needed a change, right? Okay. And so I was looking for a principal job, but then there's a shift in me, and that's when I realized, okay, like maybe I need to get out of education. Yeah. So I started looking at like, I don't know, like HR opportunities, things like that, like where I could still apply. Like, I mean, I've hired a lot, and so I've been through that. Yeah. So I looked at that route, but to start in HR, like coming out of like with no experience, you're starting like even less than I made as a first year teacher. Oh, wow. And so I was like, okay, not an option. Yeah. So when I was on the ESC website, like looking for what was next, I saw their posting. And then so I was like, well, and again, I checked the job description. I was like, man, I've done all of this. So I applied and I got it. But I will say too, like naturally, I've always wanted to work at this. Well, like for me, like my next step was central office. But we are in a position right now, like nationwide, where schools are getting less funding. So those positions at the top, they're not available anymore. So when somebody leaves, then that role becomes somebody else's role, right? So they just merge it. They just spread out the responsibilities, which was happening at the campus level too. Oh, okay. Right. And so, but when you're at the campus level and you're the principal, who's responsible for divvying out those duties and making sure it all works? You're the principal. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so, so that is kind of where we're at right now in education.
Yeah.
So like there were no opportunities for me to, when I say advance, I'm talking about pay, right?
Yeah.
Or like to even stay within the same pay.
Yeah.
Like that opportunity was there. This job that I took, while it's a pay cut, it's an advancement, right? And so like I'm consulting.
Yeah.
And I work with leaders.
Yeah.
And it's like a coaching job, basically is what it is. You're coaching leaders. And for me, like that's always been very natural to me.
Yeah.
And so I thought, man, even if I don't do this for a long time, like the skills that I'm requiring, like the amount of training, so I've been there 6 months.
Okay.
This first semester, because I started in the summer, has been all training.
Oh, wow.
All training.
Oh, okay.
And then going into next semester, like I'm getting my first campus when we come back.
Okay.
And so I'll be coaching an instructional coach.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's going to be like my first, like, okay, cool, you know? But again, so going back to legislation and all that. So like, as you know, or you may not know, but, there's like 70 something superintendents that are suing TEA.
Oh, I didn't know.
Well, because, so they came up with a new STAR test, right? Mm-hmm. And so
are they changing the name?
No. They kept the same name.
Okay.
So it's been 2 years that we've been in legislation with them. So 2 years ago, they changed the math test, like the way it was scored, right?
Yeah.
And then they wanted to. So of course, naturally, like so, basically, they're saying like too many schools are scoring too high. So now let's change the passing rate, right? Yeah. So then when the scores came out, like a bunch of schools were failing. Mm-hmm. They changed the way that they were rating schools. That's what it was. Oh, so they lowered. Okay. So they increased the scale scores, right? So it was harder to be an A and B school. Yeah. Well, mind you, in the background, they're trying to pass these vouchers. So the more failing schools you have, the more marketable that this voucher thing looks, right? Yeah. So they changed. So 2 years ago, they did that. So the school district sued. And they're like, no, we shouldn't be graded, you know, this and that. Yeah. Then the English test, the way that they graded, the way that they assessed and scored the English test changed. Okay. But they didn't make the determination of what those scale scores were until after everyone took the STAR test. After. Wow. So then it was after everyone tested, then they made their scales.
Like, okay, well, yeah.
So then now they're making all of us look bad. Yeah. Like my campus went from a B school right after COVID, the year after COVID. Yeah. We went from an 84 to a 72. Just like that from changing if they had released the scores. So they haven't released the ratings, right? They released the scores. Yeah. And then you're able to do your own calculations of like, what if we had released your ratings? What would you have gotten? Oh, okay. But it was so crazy because in a lot of our areas, we had growth. Mm-hmm. We had significant growth in masters. Yeah. But you're telling me I dropped down a rating?
Yeah. Because of the new criteria.
New criteria. Okay. Right? And so it's like, you're constantly up against like these, the politics of it all. Yeah. And it's like, I mean, come on. So the same thing happened this year. They changed scoring again and waited to release what that was going to be like. And so school district sued again. So they haven't released ratings. Okay. But they released scores. Yeah. And so again, looking back at how my campus performed last year, 6th grade growth, 8th grade growth, 7th grade, not so much. Yeah. And that was actually where I knew that was going to be an area, but we had growth in masters and like you get double the points for kids that are in masters and then still like your overall score doesn't increase much. Right. Yeah. And so personally, I think it's a political way of justifying this voucher system, which then only benefits still the rich. Yeah. Doesn't benefit the kids that I served, the probably majority of the kids that you served, but my whole career has been Title I. Mm-hmm. And so you're taking away from the kids who need it the most. Yeah. And you're making their schools look awful. Yeah. You know, in the process. Yeah. And it's like, we work so hard. Yeah. And it doesn't matter what you do. It's like, nah, you're D campus. Yeah. You know? Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I have, my kids are in public school. I was a public school teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever that conversation comes up, like, should I, I have friends that, oh, my kids are in charter, my kids are in private, right? I don't know if I'm biased because I went to public school, I taught in the public school, my kids are in public school, but I've always had a good experience, right? I grew up in a neighborhood. I don't know if you're familiar with the Glen.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a neighborhood that was very, socioeconomically disadvantaged.
Very much
a lot
in
of
the Glen.
gangs, a lot of drugs, a lot of violence, a lot of, right? My parents did a good job of like, hey, school is your job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then taking us to church and trying to build, good relationships. And the teachers that I had in those schools wanted the best for me, right? And they did their best to teach me and create a learning environment. And I took advantage of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was successful in elementary, in middle, high school, went to college, right? Now I have my own company. Like I took advantage of the opportunities available to me, right? Like you're saying, this voucher program, do you think it creates like what effect do you think that has on public school, right? Because the parents have, I think, with I don't know a lot about the voucher system, but it creates this like, oh well, this school is better,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm gonna send my kid to this school.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'm like, okay, but me as a parent, what responsibility do I have in my child's education,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I don't look at my kids' school's ratings, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm always like, it's on you.
Yeah.
Like all the teachers that I have known is like, okay, my job is to teach,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm not going to spoon feed you your education.
Right.
Your job is to pay attention and
Right.
listen and do your work. And so when I was in the classroom, I had 3 rules, right? Be respectful, be responsible, always do your best. So I tell that to my kids. Like when you go to school, it's your responsibility to be responsible, be respectful, always do your best.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you have a teacher that's strict or fun, like I don't care what your teacher, like her teaching style,
Mm-hmm.
I don't care. Like it's your responsibility
Mm-hmm.
to teach. Kind of like the analogy where you can lead a horse to water, but you can't
Right.
make him drink.
Right.
I'm like, you're the horse.
Right.
Like the teacher's going to lead you to the water. You have to drink. Like it's your responsibility. Do you think the voucher system creates this in parenting, like this, like, well, it's the school's responsibility?
It's a false narrative.
Okay.
For sure. And it hasn't passed yet, right?
Okay.
But they're working really hard to make us look bad so
Yeah.
that it can pass.
Yeah.
And so, and it may pass because of the way that our election went.
Yeah.
But what's going to happen, what the
Yeah.
ripple effect is going to be is that this funding, so you have to have like a bank
Mm-hmm.
of funding for
Yeah.
those vouchers. And so you have this money sitting here for
Yeah.
people to use, to take advantage of, and they can only use them at charters or at private schools.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not for the public schools.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
So you're taking away funding. You're taking away federal funds
Yeah.
to put into this bank
Yeah.
to then award each kid $10,000 to go wherever, right?
Yeah.
But most charter schools also receive federal funding. So we're
Yes.
we're not talking your normal like IDEA.
Yeah.
We're not, because it doesn't cost anything to go to IDEA.
Yeah.
We're talking about these elite campuses,
Yeah.
right? So think about it. Being a kid from the Glen,
Mhm.
what are the chances that your parents know
Yeah.
anything about this?
No.
But also, how far is $10,000 going to get you at Saks, right? At a private school.
Yeah.
$10,000 isn't going to pay for anything
Yeah.
because tuition there's like $22,000, right?
Okay.
So that again, it's this. So then, what happens with that money?
Yeah.
Well, it still goes. It still goes to them.
Okay.
So why aren't we putting that money into our public schools
Yeah.
where we don't get to choose who we get?
Yeah.
We get whoever lives in the neighborhood, and that's who
Yeah.
comes to our schools,
Yeah.
right? And so what's going to happen even more than it is now is that you keep taking funding away and you aren't able to hire the people that you need.
Yeah.
And eventually that's going to catch up
Yeah.
because you're not going to have enough teachers.
Yeah.
You're not going to have enough administrators.
Yeah.
People are going to burn out.
Yeah.
So what's going to look more attractive for my kid to go to this school that has it together?
Yeah.
You know, but they have it together because they're getting the funding. But also, why are we spoon feeding the people who have the means?
Yeah.
Like charters and private are an option.
Yeah.
You get to choose. And if you have the money, great, send your kids there. Like, cool. Like you worked for that, right?
Yeah.
But public school doesn't work the same way. You get what you get.
Yeah.
Right. And you don't throw a fit.
Yeah.
That's what and so it's those disparities are going to get even wider than they are. And it's so unfortunate because, and I'm very political on my Instagram, but not so much on my Facebook. And because on my Facebook, I have many of my friendships are from all the schools that I worked at. Yeah. Right. Every once in a while, I'll make like a public statement where I take a stand on something. I feel like we spent so much time, and especially like looking back at our experiences in public school, right? Yeah. Like it never mattered that we were undocumented or that we were poor or that we didn't speak English. Yeah. Like they worked with us and like, look where we are now, right? Yeah. And so for me, it's like we spent all these years of No Child Left Behind. And granted, that wasn't a great system, but like those types of, you know, and making sure that all kids now can eat for free. Yeah. And like just all of these gains that we've made in education. And you know, like being a teacher, like all of the regulations that came with like special ed. Yeah. They didn't have that when we were growing up, right? But that has come because of the disparities that are there. Yeah. And so we've done all of this work and we're finally making progress.
And it requires funding.
That requires funding. Yeah. And now they're like taking a step back. Like now, like we're going completely backwards. And it's so disheartening because it's like just being the principal of the little, you know, the little school that I was at. And it's like my kids walked to school. So when it rained, my kids didn't come to school. Oh, wow. Because they weren't walking in the rain. Yeah. Right. And so like that was like, man, like we really didn't have buses at my school. We had two buses. And when we were growing up, I mean, I know for me, like my elementary school was in my neighborhood, but I had a bus, right, that picked me up. And so like you think about those things, and those are the types of disparities that when you're in the principalship, you realize like that your kids deserve more. And so like, I loved our little theater program. My kids are so talented. And it's just like, they're in these musicals and you see them put this whole production together. Yeah. And you're like, man, they did that with almost nothing. Wow. Right. Yeah. And they made this whole production happen. Yeah. And so we took our theater kids to NISA, which is like the theater program at Lee. Uh-huh. And the kids came back, Miss, you need to get us an auditorium and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, tell your parents to vote, you know, make sure they vote for the right person. And so I would tell them like, those were opportunities for me to have like that grown up conversation with them. We're like, hey, I'm the principal, but I don't get to make those decisions. Yeah. Like, I don't get to say, oh, I'm going to build you a new auditorium. Yeah. The kids are like, you don't. I'm like, no, trust me. If I could, you would have one. Right. And so, so then that would like, those were opportunities to be like, guys, it's a political thing. You have to vote appropriately and your parents have to make sure that they vote for this. And when a bond comes up, like what are they voting for in a bond? And where is that money going to go? Yeah. It's going to benefit you. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, it's just a lot of things like that you don't necessarily, realize like the impact that's having until you're in that role. Yeah. Where you're starting to see the impact. Yeah. And it's only like right now, sadly to say, it's only getting worse. Yeah. I heard Northeast is considering closing like schools. 5 schools. Wow. Finally. And we were already there. So the district I was at, Harlandale, not very big. Mm-hmm. Like 10,000 students, I think, is our population. Yeah. We shut down 5 schools 2 years ago. Oh. We repurposed. We repurposed 5 campuses, right? Yeah. But some of the elementaries were operating with like 300 kids when they were built for 800. right?
Wow.
But then here's to the vacancies, the amount of vacancies that we had in the district. And it's like, why are we spreading ourselves thin when if we combined campuses, then all those vacancies would be filled, right?
Yeah.
And so that, and it did have that natural effect.
Yeah.
But right now too, it's a teacher's market, right? Okay. So we're at a time where like nobody wants to teach.
Yeah.
Nobody wants, it's not as appealing as it used to be. Mm-hmm. And so it, like, teachers literally can go anywhere at any time. Like if they are not happy at your campus, they can go somewhere else, and they will easily find a job at another campus. Yeah. There used to be ramifications for that, right? Like breaking a contract, and there being some kind of hold on your certification, and that's just not where we're at. Like SPEC doesn't even look at those because we're at a teacher shortage. So what are you gonna do? Like tell them, like keep someone who is fully certified from filling a position? They're just not right now. Yeah, I think for me as principal, I hope, right, if you were to like interview teachers from my campus, that they would tell you that I led with a lot of empathy, and that became very important. So my first year as principal was COVID year. Wow. And that was actually my favorite year. Okay. Because I got to build that trust with my campus before the kids ever, like before I even met any of the kids. Yeah. Right? And so for me, going into it as a first year principal at a new campus in a district where no one knew me. Yeah. It was important for me to allow those teachers, a lot of my teachers, to make those decisions that we had to make, because ultimately they were the ones doing the work. Yeah. And another thing, and jokingly, right, but like honestly, I would tell them, like, we would vote on everything. So like if they wanted a new program for us to use for like virtual learning, we took a vote, right? Yeah. And so I would tell them, like, we voted, and so if it doesn't work, you can't be mad at me. Yeah. Because we all voted on this. Yeah. Right. So like this isn't the principal's fault. Yeah. And they were fine with it. And like the schedule that we had, everything that we did during that year, I very much let my teachers take the lead because they were the ones doing it, you know? Yeah. And so I think that allowed me to like build trust, but then it was the after effect of like the trickle effect that COVID had. And it's in that, you know, I had teachers who lost family members during that time. Oh. I had teachers that got very sick during that time, that were hospitalized. And so you learn, like, for me, it was just seeing like the human side of things. Yeah. And all this other stuff that we have to take, like, that needs to wait, right? Yeah. Because like we have people really going through things. One of the things that we noticed when the kids came back was that a lot of our kids never dealt with loss. And that zip code was one of the zip codes that had the most deaths of 65 and older, right? Okay. When COVID first hit San Antonio. Yeah. That population that died were my kids, my students' grandparents. Yeah. And that's who was raising them. Wow. Right? And so when you think about the effect that has, and then we're Hispanic, like you get up, you move on, right? Like we're not going to cry about it, you know, whatever. We're not going to. And so my kids weren't getting like the proper like help or counseling to deal with the loss of their grandparents and essentially like their mom, right? Or their dad, whoever was raising them. Yeah. And then their whole household changes because that's no longer the head of the household is gone. Yeah. So then now you have to go live with your real parent who hasn't raised you your whole life. Yeah. And it was just like this crazy after effect. Wow. And then Uvalde happened and it got worse. Yeah. It got worse. And then to me, like, that was the year where I wanted to get out. And then I will say this. So at the beginning of the following school year, so I looked for jobs and I couldn't get out. And so I was just like, oh, well, I'm stuck, right? I'm going to do another year. And then at the beginning of the following school year, when we had our principal retreat, they invited Pastor Ed from CBC to come speak to us. And he, and it's just the principals. And he's like, he said, God has chosen you every single one of you to be the leader of your campus. You are not here by chance.
Yeah.
You are here because God has hand selected you.
Yeah.
And he's like, think about all of the schools in San Antonio.
Yeah.
You are a principal of one of those schools.
Yeah.
Like that's a big responsibility, right? And he's like, and you have to honor that responsibility like it was God given.
Yeah.
You have been selected.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there like, and I was just like bawling because like the year before was like the awful year.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to quit.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, man, like God chose me to be here. Like this, like I am meant to be here. And so that last year, best year.
Wow,
best year. And
awesome.
it was a mind shift of like, I get to be here.
Yeah.
You know,
privilege.
Not I have to be here.
Yeah.
That came with a very successful year.
Okay.
Very happy staff, very happy children.
Yeah.
Very happy me.
Yeah.
Where I finally got to that cliff of despair, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I can step away and they're all going to be okay.
That's awesome.
You know?
That's good.
And that was ultimately like the change for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if everyone had that mentality at their job, the world would be,
much better.
So much better.
Yes.
Because I think about that. So going back to my parents not recognizing my strength, I think teaching is just a strength of mine. Mm-hmm. And so even when I left the classroom, everything that I've been involved in, I see myself as a teacher, right? When I coach my kids, sports, a teacher. When I became an inspector, like that was and that's how we market our company is like, I'm going to teach you about your home.
Yeah.
Like I'm not here to kill the deal, or I'm not here to show how smart I am. Look at all these problems I found. Like that's not us. It's okay. This is your home. Obviously you picked it because you love it. I'm just going to teach you about the condition of the home. And some of these things you're going to fix, other things like you can live with. Like my house probably has stuff that I'm just like, we're just going to live with that. Right. But just teaching. Right.
Yeah.
And so when I do an inspection, the other thing, right, the other opportunity we've had as immigrants is buying a home and the wealth that has like our family has created from that. I connect those two things. So when I do an inspection, I'm like, man, I have the opportunity to like teach someone about their potential home. And then they're going to be able to build wealth from this. And so I take my job very seriously. And like you said, the opportunity to like, I'm going to check if there's a little scratch on the wall, I'm going to take a picture of it.
Yeah.
Because it may not matter to me, but it may matter to you, right? Like, I go to a brand new house. Yeah, it's your house. Yeah. Like I'm going to document every single thing because I want you to know everything about this house. And then whatever you do with that information, if you don't buy the house or if you get it fixed, whatever, it's up to you. But like you said, right, the opportunity to serve people in that capacity, like I just take very seriously. And so it's a good mentality to have. It
was at a very low point of my career. And it impacted me so bad. Like despite what's going on in my personal life. Yeah. The fact that I got to this point in my career, which is everything I've ever worked for. Yeah. To be at a place where it's like I didn't serve a purpose. Like what am I like? These kids are bad. They're gonna be bad, and politics is going to crap, and so that and just seeing all the negative and like feeding into that. And that year was like horrible for me. Yeah. You get 10 sick days. I took all 10. Like I was like, screw this. Blah, blah. But then that message came at a point where like it not only like gave me this revival in my purpose in my job, but also it made me look within of like, okay, what's next for me personally? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Because I've spent so much of my youth aspiring to grow in my career that I have offset some very important things in my personal life. Yeah. Yeah. But because these things gave me purpose. Yeah. And they gave me purpose why? Because it mattered to my mom. It gave me purpose why? Because I made more money. It gave me purpose why? Because I got to build my wealth, right? Yeah. Like I tell my nieces and nephews, like, if I die, y'all are gonna be really rich, right? But I talk to them about the responsibility that comes with getting that money from me if and when I die. Yeah. And what are you gonna do with it? And what are we gonna invest in? You know, and having those conversations that nobody ever had with us. Yeah. But knowing that this aspiration that I had in growing in my career allowed me to have the opportunities to have that net worth and to have those conversations with my niece and nephews. To tell them, like, hey, when and if this happens, like, you have to be responsible, right? Because the opportunities that you guys have, like, we didn't have that growing up, you know? And I've always struggled with that. Like, how do you teach your own kids the struggle without them struggling? Because I think a lot of life lessons came to us for growing up like that. Oh, yeah. You know?
It's funny. I was telling my wife, so they're going to build an Olive Garden, like, kind of close to my house. And my son made a comment. He was like, we were showing him, hey guys, look, they're going to build an Olive Garden, right? Because my third son, Daniel, he loves Olive Garden. He loves bread. So free breadsticks. Yeah. He's like, So we tell him, hey, they're going to build an Olive Garden here. And he's like, oh man, me and my friends are going to ride our bikes and we're going to come eat at Olive Garden.
Do you remember when they used to take us to Olive Garden before a soccer game? And that was
that was I was like, I don't know
fancy,
how to act.
Right? Yes. That's what I was like.
I don't want to mess anything up.
And now Olive Garden, you're like, Olive Garden, I'll go there for lunch, you know? I'm not going on a date there.
Yeah, I told my wife.
Everything.
Yeah. I told my wife, I was like, we made it. Our kids are riding their bikes to Olive Garden for lunch.
Seriously. We used to go ride our bikes to the little butter crust, whatever is the little bakery things that they used to have where all the bad bread went. Oh, okay. And it went there for discount, but you had to eat it within like the hour. Yeah. Like that's where we rode our bikes.
Yeah, we went to Stop and Go.
It's not Olive Garden.
And then I would buy the drink, my friend would buy the chips, and then we'd share.
Yes, it's crazy. Man, it's crazy.
In fact, the first time, there's a gas station right here by my house. The first time my boys were like, hey, can we ride to the gas station? And I'm like, sure, yeah. And then my wife was like, wait, like they're already gone. Mm-hmm. She's like, wait, how are they going to come back? So she lived in an apartment. It was just her and her sister. So they didn't have boys, right? So she didn't know about the whole bike riding. Yeah. She goes, how are they going to bring the stuff back? Like, how are they going to carry it? And I was like, you get a bag and you hang it on the handlebar. And you try not to hit it with your knee. Yeah. That's it. And she was like, oh, okay. Well, now they got smart. My son takes a backpack. Oh, that's cool. I'm like, don't walk in there with it. They're going to think you're trying to steal stuff. Yeah. Anyways, first world problems.
For real. But we've made it.
Yeah, we've made it. It's crazy. Just in one generation, the things that can be accomplished.
For sure.
So yeah, I mean, my parents, they did their best, right? Even the message to like chase the money, like didn't fall on deaf ears, right? Like money's important. I tell my kids, money touches everything. Like you can't do anything without money. Mm-hmm. So it's important. But like we are learning, it's not everything. Right. It's an important aspect. But, mental health, emotional health, balance, relationships, all those things I think matter. In fact, one of the reasons I started this channel is to teach my kids that, right? Like you can, so like your story, right? I interviewed a nurse not too long ago. And she was in the Navy. She's a nurse and she's working in that. And she's like, I think I want to do something else. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm like, yeah, like my sister's going through that. Like my sister's in HR and she's like, I don't want to do this anymore. She's been doing it for 20 years. Mm-hmm. She's like, I don't want to do this anymore. And so I'm telling my kids like, yeah, go to college or technical, like start a business, whatever. Right. But whatever you do now, you don't have to do this for the rest of your life. Like there are millions of ways to make money. Mm-hmm. There's a company in New York. Because New York, some of the apartments are so small. Mm-hmm. This company will bring your furniture in and out. When you move in or you move out, they will disassemble your furniture, take it up, assemble it. Mm-hmm. And then when you move out, they'll disassemble it, take it out, and assemble it for you. That's all they do. They assemble and disassemble furniture up and down stairs. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, like you can do that.
And
like it's a service and
yeah.
people need it.
And it was a need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're just I tell my kids, you're either providing a product or selling a product or providing a service.
Yeah.
And you can do that anywhere.
Yeah.
And you can change careers when you're in your 40s.
Right? It's knowing what to do with the skills you've acquired and how to like apply that to whatever it is that you're doing next.
Yeah.
For sure.
Very cool. So right now you're just training. You're just do you see yourself as a teacher again?
I don't know if I could ever go back. So
No, I'm sorry. I meant in your role, because now you're
okay.
It's called consulting.
Consulting, yes.
But you're really teaching.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's more like a
coaching,
guided
teaching,
conversation, mentoring.
So ultimately, our job is to work with schools that are in like F ratings or have federal identifications for being failing schools.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So right now we only have those federal identifiers.
Mm-hmm.
And so those schools got identified because they're in the bottom 25 percentile of the nation. Yeah. Right. There's a lot of schools in San Antonio. Oh. A lot in SAISD. So those are the schools we're working with. Some of the schools we're working with. If F ratings came out this year, we would have had to hire more of me. Oh, wow. Because it was going to be a lot. Yeah. And right now that's in litigation. So like it hasn't been released. Oh, okay. But that's the intent, right? There's like this political intent behind that. And so what we're doing is we have like 5 different criteria that you can help these failing schools with. Yeah. And so we go in and it's like a 2-year service because you have 3 years to get out of that rating. Okay. So we provide this like 2-year mentoring, right? Okay. So we provide you the training, we provide you the skills, we provide you this framework. Mm-hmm. And if you follow it to a T, essentially you should get out of this rating. This rating, mm-hmm. no matter your kids, right? Okay. No matter the kids that you have. Yeah. If you do these things, mm-hmm. this should work. But also like recently being on a campus, I also have that like the reality of the situation when you are on the campus. Yeah. And so while this is all really good work, and this is what I struggle with right now in my role, and I talk to my colleagues about this, it's so like even when we're talking about just the PD that we're giving, right? Yeah. We're talking about like the breaks to give them and this and this and that. And then like I have this one colleague who like this is her job and she's very passionate about it. She's good. Yeah. And so she's like, I'm going to give them homework. And I'm like, boss. Like if you gave me homework, I'm done with you. Yeah. Because when I leave this training, I still probably have to go to a volleyball game, a basketball game. Yeah. And if I had a family of my own, I would still have my own children to tend to when I get home, right? Yeah. So I told her, we're not giving them homework because they have so much more that they have to. But it's like having that mindset of like the reality of while this framework in practice is ideal, what does that look like in reality when they go back to their campuses, right? Good. So that's what I tried to do because some of them are like far removed from that. Like they've been in this role for a while that they they forget. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So have you read the book, The Homework Myth? Mm-mm. Oh man, it's such a good book. I read it when I was an elementary teacher. And the funny thing, right? So I got pushback from everyone. I got pushback from the students. They were like, what? Like, no homework, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what am I supposed to do when I get home? And then the parents, they're like, what? They're going to fall behind if you don't give them homework. And then I told my principal, right? I was like, I'm not going to give homework anymore. Mm-hmm. And she's like, I think it's required. Like, it's in the district, like, manual, policy. Policy. And then I told her about the book. I'm like, this is why, right? So basically, long story short, this guy makes the argument that kids should be doing more important things when they get home. Building relationships, hobbies, learning an instrument, helping with dinner, eating dinner together as a family, like little stuff like that, right? And then the other argument he makes is the kids that can do it independently don't need to be doing it because they've already mastered that. And then the kids that can't do it,
like they need
they're not going to be
a
able
professional to guide them through it.
Yeah.
And so you're not helping anyone. You're just creating problems. With the parents are fighting with the kids because they don't understand it. And the parents are like stressed from work. And I'm not a teacher, but you got to do your homework.
Yeah.
And then these kids that can do it by themselves, like they've already mastered it.
Right.
So I was like, this makes a lot of sense. So I stopped giving homework. And it was crazy the amount of parents that were like, you need to give my kids homework. And I'm like, okay. So then I would just create like worksheets.
Yeah.
I'm like, if you have to take work home, like here's the homework, but I'm not going to grade it. I'm not going to check it. Like this is because your parents are asking me. So here you go. And then my recycle bin, I called it my homework file or whatever. And I'm like, go ahead and turn it into the homework bin. And then later, literally they would throw away the homework.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's important. So then when I became a parent, like that, I tell my kids that, right? Like now that they're getting older, I'm like, okay, if it takes more than 30 minutes, like take a break, stop. Right. But I just have a different perspective on homework. But I think the message that you just explained is, I think it's important there's a lot of people on Instagram that are like, oh, you got to be your own boss and you got to start your own company and working 9 to 5. That's for, and I'm like, but you can't just go from nothing to being the boss. I think it's important to, be an employee, work your way up, and the lessons that you learn along the way, because then you can go back like you and you can say, well, I remember doing this. I remember being a teacher. I remember being a principal. I remember being this. And I have a job to do, but you can't, there's a reality, right? There's things that they're dealing with in real life that I can't just come in with all my theory and say, do this and do this and do this. And it's
funny because I think that's part of the shift that we're going through in education right now as administrators, that we get hung up on, and that even teachers get hung up on. Yeah. And it's kind of what I was talking to you when I got here, is this, like, we have to surrender to the fact that the kids are not the way they used to be. Yeah. They're not being taught at home how to be respectful and responsible. Yeah. They're not. And it doesn't matter if you have this military background, right? Yeah. The emotional need that kids need these days is far outweighs any academic need. Yeah. Right? Because they're on their phones. They have to be liked. They have to be wearing the coolest thing. Yeah. Your parents have to have a decent job. Like, there's so many things that when we were growing up, like that didn't impact our ability to be good students at school, right? Yeah. Our only job was to be students. Yeah. And now there's so much pressure on these kids. And then on top of that, you have bullying, you have school shootings, you have suicide rates, you have like all of these things that are having an impact on our kids. Yeah. And it's like, I used to tell my staff, does it really matter at the end of the day when they're sitting in your classroom doing the work that you want them to do? Does it matter if they're wearing Crocs? Does Crocs stop them from doing the work? The only thing that's going to stop them is when we don't let them go to class because they're wearing Crocs.
Wow. That was like a policy?
Yes.
Really?
And it was like a mind shift. And so like my teachers would think that I was being too lax. And I would tell them, but like, is our goal to have them in the classroom learning, or is our goal to make sure that they wear tennis shoes? Right? Yeah. And so like the slides was a big thing, but I will say this, while I didn't agree with it, and my kids were like, I mean, they were still wearing them. Yeah. And so now we had kids missing class time because they're in the office over shoes, right? Yeah. And so, so then I had some kids ask me like, what can we do? And so I told them, I said, hey, do a petition, Google it, look up what a petition is. Yeah. Get 1,000 signatures, right? Yeah. Actually, I think I told them 500 because we didn't have 1,000 kids. I said, get 500 signatures. Yeah. And then do a presentation. Yeah. And when you do that, like, and you present why it's okay. Yeah. So ultimately their argument was that they could wear the thing on the back, the safety, they call it on the...
My son calls it sports mode.
Sports mode, yes. Okay. So safety mode, right? But that was the kid's argument, was to put it in that, like to wear them that way.
Yeah.
And so when they came and I told them, and then when you come to present to me your argument, you better dress up because this is a presentation. So they did. So 3 of them, they did their little PowerPoint.
Yeah.
They did their little presentation. And I was like, okay, yes, I agree.
Yeah.
But we have to change the district policy. And I don't have the power to do that.
Yeah.
They're like, what do you mean? So now you have to present to the superintendent. What? So then I called the superintendent. He came in and he's like, okay,
cool. Yeah.
But really, the policy says it's up to the principal. But I wanted them to have that experience, right? And then for them to feel like we did this. Like because of the work we did, everyone's allowed to wear slides or Crocs now, right?
Yeah.
And so having that experience and having the kids take the lead on that, I think my teachers were like, oh, okay, it's not worth the argument, right?
Yeah.
But getting people to the little things like that I'm like, why are we so hung up? Homework. I would tell my teachers, like, I'm not requiring it. And if you don't want to do it, cool. And if you do, it should be because they didn't finish in class or an extension of what you're doing, but because it's necessary, right?
Yeah.
Not just because it's busy work, not just to whatever, but we didn't assign grades. We didn't have a category for homework. But it's those little, so we're going through this, and it's even the conversations that I had with the principal lately in that, even teachers are having a difficulty with this in that we can't just expect kids to just do what we ask them to do.
Yeah.
Because they're not doing it at home. Right? And so we have to teach them what the expectation is. Yeah. So when I say, be quiet and sit down.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Right? Because be quiet and sit down might look different in a different class. It might look different at home. Be quiet and sit down might mean go to your room and get on your tablet. Yeah. And that's not what it means in my classroom. And so having to define what that looks like, when we did that last year I was there, like we spent time teaching the kids the behaviors that we expected, what it looked like and what it didn't look like. Right? And it's PBIS. But man, the transformation that it had on my campus was insane. It was crazy. And like the scores were going up. We were able to identify our behavior went down too. We were able to identify those kids and like the behavior kids in tier 3 that needed like extra support. But because we had fewer kids that we were dealing with, we were able to provide that one-on-one support. And I mean, that completely transformed my campus that last year. Like awesome. It was, and I could miss work. And I wouldn't be getting text messages about this happened and this happened and this happened, you know?
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, okay, like I can step away. You know? I like, this is a good opportunity for me to be like, I love y'all, but I gotta go.
No, it's interesting what you say about the words that we say, right? Because I had that with my daughter growing up. I would tell her, clean your room, right? She understood, okay, my room has to look clean, right? Clean to her was different. It was different, right? So I walk in and the closet's full of mess. Under the bed is full of mess. So I start pulling things out. She's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, your room isn't clean. She's like, you're making it dirty. You're going to clean that up. She would tell me, you're going to clean that up. And I'm like, Rebecca, like, this isn't what cleaning is. Like, these things don't go here. Everything should have a place. Not, okay, throw it in the closet and close the door. Or stick it under the bed. Like that. Like this shirt. Hang the shirt. You have a, like, you know. So yeah, we went through that. It was a process of teaching her, okay, when I mean clean the room,
this is what I want to see. I mean. Yes. And so and having like those conversations with them about, okay, what does clean mean, right? Now that they know.
Yeah.
Okay. So then they tell you. And then you say, so is it clean?
Yeah.
Based on what you just told me it should be.
Yeah. Is this
what you see, does that meet the criteria? Yeah. And then the kid self-identifies, no.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do we do to fix it?
Yeah.
I need to go do this. Okay. So the next time I see you, I expect it to be fit. Okay.
Yeah.
And that conversation is so much more powerful than you have 3 days of ISS.
Yeah.
And then like we didn't address the behavior. We didn't fix the behavior.
Yeah.
And they're probably going to be in ISS for the same thing again because we never taught them what we expected when we said. And granted, some things do deserve a consequence, an immediate consequence to be like, even for the teacher's peace of mind, like out of sight, out of mind, even if it's for like one day of ISS.
Yeah.
But even in ISS,
Yeah.
they were having to self-reflect about why they were in ISS.
Yeah.
And then write an apology letter to whomever got affected by their action.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, the other thing is, as parents, I'm learning this at my son's club soccer team, right? So my son's, one's in 7th grade, one's in 5th grade. And what I expect from the coach and the team and, is different from other parents, right? And so I feel bad for the coach because he's trying to juggle all this, right? Because, okay, I have a conversation with the coach and I'm like, my son's 12 years old. My other son's 10 years old. Like, they're not professionals. Like, I could care less if they win or lose. Like, I want to see development. Like, I want them to develop. Yeah. And so this, to me, that's what this is about right now. Even when we go to tournaments, when we have games on the weekend, to me, if they lose 2-0, but they worked well together and you see progression, like, to me, that was a success. Another parent could be like,
wins and losses.
We need to win.
Yeah.
You didn't win, and then the conversation in the car with that kid is, you missed this opportunity and this bad pass and this, and why did your coach take you out and you're the best, right? Like all these, and the coach having to manage expectations, right? And so I think it's like that in the classroom, right? Because you have countless amount of people like on a teacher's mind, right? Like I have to serve the student and I have the parents and administration and then the people above that writing policy and then people, people that created the scope and sequence. I got to stay on time and because I can't fall behind because I got to get them ready for the next year. And it's so much pressure.
It is. As a principal, I tried to eliminate as much as I could. And I would tell them would protect them from the things that,
that's good.
While it mattered in their classrooms, was it the top 3 priorities, right? And the answer is normally no.
Yeah.
And so if it didn't, then that priority became my responsibility to help the teacher attain without it being an extra thing for my teacher to do, right? Good. And so I try to, one thing that I do believe I was like true till the end was never forgetting what it was like to be in the classroom and never forgetting what it was like to be in an AP or an academic dean.
Yeah.
But then ultimately, that pressure on you as a principal where you're trying to make sure everybody else is doing okay is like, who's checking on you? Yeah. And there isn't a lot of support there.
Yeah.
And so you have to go into this knowing that the recognition that you got as a teacher, you are not going to get that as an administrator. And you have to find success in those little success stories and those moments that you have that one-on-one with the kid in your office. And you got through to them. Yeah. And you're like, finally, finally she's not going to fight anymore or whatever it is. But knowing that you had that impact without anybody else knowing what impact you had that day.
Oh, wow.
But also, if you're in a district without that support at the top, where they're constantly griping about what's not being done, who's doing wrong. Yeah. And the thing is, in our district, it was so small that when one principal was doing wrong, we all had to make a change. And I used to get so frustrated because I was like, before I walk out of this meeting, we're going to know who messed up. Yeah. Right. But because that one person messed up, we all have to do this now. And I hated that. Yeah, I hated that because,
that's what homework does.
Yeah.
Like this kid's struggling with this. So everyone has to take this worksheet home.
Exactly. And that used to irritate me so much. And so before I got to my school, they were very competitive on how the other 3 middle schools were doing. And so while it was important, we were always outperforming the campuses. So then I would tell my campus, who cares? Yeah. Who cares if we're first in the district? There's only 4 of us. Yeah. That's really, when you think about it, that's really not a high goal, right? Yeah. So let's look at how other schools similar to us, comparable to us, are doing, and let's compare ourselves to that. And TA does that for you already, right? They already compare you to 25 other schools.
Yeah.
So let's look at those schools, right?
Yeah.
How do we compare to those schools? That's something we should be striving for, not how we're doing with it. And of course, I mean, even I would look at it like, oh, did we score the highest? Yeah, right. But that shouldn't be what drives us.
Yeah.
And so I would always tell my campus, like, we have to only care about what we are doing within these four walls. Like whatever is happening here, that's all that matters. Who cares about everybody else?
Yeah.
And it was really nice to see that shift because I no longer got the conversations of, well, they're doing this at this school. They're doing this at that school.
Yeah.
You know, we became that conversation for others, you know? And so I would tell my campuses, like my campus, my teachers, like this is us scoring the highest in the district is not a goal if we're still scoring low in the state, right?
Yeah.
That's not what drives us. And so, I would never compete. Like I would never say, we got to beat this school and we got to beat that school. Because ultimately, when our kids leave our campus, they're going to go be at that high school with those other kids that they're competing against. And they're going to be teammates and they're going to be, they're on the same team, right? But I know that's something that people struggle with. So like I did 12 years of high school, right? My last 4 years were middle school. When I got to the middle school campus, there were maybe 2 people that had ever been at a high school.
Wow.
So nobody sees beyond 8th grade.
Yeah.
And that to me was like, oh my gosh, like there's so much more than just 8th grade. And like getting my teachers to see that, like to get there was a struggle.
Yeah.
But those were conversations that I had to have. Like when they would talk about retention, like retaining a kid. And I would tell them, okay, yes, I get what you're saying, right? But if we retain them, what are we going to do differently?
Okay.
What responsibility do we have to this kid to redo 6th grade?
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. When you retain a kid, they don't get taught differently. They just have to go through what they didn't understand the first time. So like, so I would tell my teachers like, what can we do differently for them in 7th grade that they didn't get in 6th grade to help them catch up? Versus making them stay in 6th grade and doing the same thing that they didn't get the first time. Yeah. And I did have some pushback. The other part of that too was the pushback on the kids that missed school, right? Okay. And so I would pull up all the stats that they're like the national stats of holding back a kid because of attendance. And it's like, okay, so we're going to make them stay in 6th grade because they have irresponsible parents. Like, how is that fair to the kid? And trust me, I get it. They missed 60 days of school and so they didn't get this stuff. But like, that is something that is beyond our control. What can we do when we do have this kid in our campus those other days and work? And so that when they leave 8th grade, they're not dropping out in high school. That's what I'm worried about. I'm not worried about them passing 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I'm worried about what's going to happen to them when they go to high school. Because if we start this now here, then they're never going to make it. And that's what I would tell my teachers. Like, we have to see beyond 8th grade. Because it's ultimately like our biggest moment is when they cross the stage in 12th grade. That's when we get to celebrate. You know, I hated doing the bridging ceremony, which is when they go from 8th to 9th. I hated doing that. But then someone higher up was like, you have to understand that in this district, sometimes that's the only time they get to see their kid graduate.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, okay, I get that. But why aren't we striving for more?
Yeah, that shouldn't be the goal.
Why aren't we making them wait for that moment in 12th grade? And I get that at some point they made this a celebration because kids weren't making it to 12th grade. But
it's kind of like lowering the bar.
Yes. But if our high school is being federally identified because their dropout rate is so high, their graduation rate is low. What are we doing systematically to improve that graduation rate? And to me, we don't celebrate when they go from 8th to 9th grade. Like, yes, here's your certificate. Cool. Right. But we need to be celebrating 12th grade. And that needs to be the moment. And for us, I think that's what drove us was graduating high school for our parents and going to college because that was ingrained in us. Right? Like,
well, ours was college.
Ours was college.
Even high school wasn't a big deal.
No. And I was like such a good kid in high school. Like my mom has no idea. Like I remember at graduation, And you know, the pamphlet and all the things. My mom was
all
like,
the recognition.
you did all of this? And I was like, yeah, Mom, I was kind of a badass. Like, I wasn't like super involved in high school.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, that was for me to do.
Yeah.
So that I could go to college, because that was the goal.
Mm-hmm.
That was the goal in my house. Was you're going to graduate college.
Yeah, that was ours. Ours was college. Like, it wasn't even a discussion.
Yeah.
Like, school doesn't stop at 12th grade.
I remember my mom said to me, and this is like my favorite quote, and I put it in everything. She says, there's one thing that no one can take away from you in this world, and it's your education.
Yeah.
Right? So the more you're educated, the more you're educated.
Mm-hmm.
And so she used to tell me, like when I would be upset about something, she would tell me, so what are you going to do about it? Like, what are you learning from this? You know? And so I didn't have that, like, even through a breakup, when I would be crying, she said, why are you crying? Why are you crying? You know, like, you think he's the only man here? You know, and so like, what did you learn from this?
Yeah.
So that you don't do it in your next relationship.
Yeah.
Okay. And like, I have to wipe away the tears.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of like the trauma that I'm like dealing with now, truthfully speaking. But
no, but there's a level of truth in like, and there is value in learning from everything.
Yes.
And everyone, I think.
Yes.
Which is, you know, but my daughter comes to me and she's like, I have to pick a track for high school, like a career path. Mm-hmm. And then she ends up picking dental assistant because she met a lady that's a radiology tech and she wants to do that. And that lady said, in order to do this, I had to be a dental assistant. And so my daughter's like, okay, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm like, well, that's not the only path, right? That may not be the only path. Right. I don't know anything about radiology or anything like that. So I'm like, oh man, you know what? I'm going to find a radiology tech. And in fact, next week I'm going to interview a radiology tech. Cool. And I'm like, yeah, like, let's find out. Let's find out what the path is. What does he like about his job? What are the things he doesn't like about his job? And then let's see if in 4 years, when you graduate high school, that's still what you want to do.
Right.
And if it's not, it's okay.
Right.
And if it's not a waste of time to do dental assisting. Else, like, you're going to learn, like you said, right? Like, now you never imagined, okay, I'm going to be a consultant. Right?
Yeah, no.
But look at everything you did that now you're like, oh man, I'm prepared to be probably more than anyone to do this, right? You have the education plus the experience. Right. You have both. Right. I interviewed a airplane mechanic and he went a different route. He never got his A&P license. He went through the Army. I forgot where he went through. And they taught him how to work on a specific plane. So now he works at Boeing working on that specific plane. But he doesn't have his A&P license, which most people get their A&P license to work on planes. Right. He doesn't have that. And so... and
clearly doesn't need it.
No, he doesn't need it. He's just like, I was taught to work on the plane and now this job opened and I work on that plane and I love it. But yeah, just... learning from everything and learning from everyone. Like, everyone has something to teach someone else. And I've been learning that as there was this one guy, he's a pharmacist now. And he said, you know what? There was a teacher that told me, hey, did you ever think about going to college? And he's like, man, like, I never, like, people in his life kept telling him, hey, did you ever think about this? Hey, did you ever think about this? Like, they saw potential in him and he didn't know what he didn't know. Right. So one teacher was like, hey, did you ever think about going to college? And he's like, no. So he ends up going to college. And then there was a professor and he's like, hey, did you ever think about getting an internship? And he's like, no. But so all these opportunities were from people telling him, did you ever think about this? Right. Right. And so...
but being in a place where people are recognizing that and giving you those opportunities. Yeah. Right. Because I think that that's still innate. Like, that's still... You still have to put yourself out there so that people can see that potential to even say that to you and get you thinking about that. And it's because they see something in you that tells you, like, hey, have you ever thought about being an administrator? Yeah. No, but I know I don't want to coach. So maybe that's next, right? Yeah. And like, that's how that starts. And it's crazy because I will tell you, like when people ask about, one of my responsibilities at Region 20 is I have this cohort of first year principals and first year administrators. It's called the Campus Administrator Academy. And so it's like, we meet once a month and it's about, building skills for that administrative position. And so I tell them, like, I can teach you about these topics, about these things that are going to impact your daily work.
Yeah.
But there is nothing that can teach you about this job as much as experience. Yeah. You have to live it. You have to do it. You have to, oh, that was not so good. Okay, this is, and when you get to that position that you ultimately want to get at, remember all of those things that got you there. Remember what you didn't like as a teacher under that principal. Remember what you didn't like as an AP, striving to be a principal. Like those are the things, and don't forget that. But also don't forget what it was like to be a teacher. Yeah. Because ultimately that's who you're serving. Yeah. If you have happy teachers, you'll have happy kids. Yeah. And if you don't, like that feeling of, oh, I don't want to be here, this school sucks, or blah, blah, blah. Like that trickles down to your teaching and into the kids. Yeah. Right. And so that's the important thing. I think that we like when people tell me how I got here, I tell them, man, those 5 years at Roosevelt High School as an assistant principal. Yeah. Like I tell everybody, if you ever work at Roosevelt, that's like administrator boot camp. Oh, nice. I learned all the things. Yeah. We had bomb threats, like guns on camp, like all of it. Yeah, right? Everything you could think of. And it's like those things were happening, but those things were happening when we were kids there. Yeah. Oh, wow. But they didn't impact us as kids, right? Yeah. And so I think about like when I was doing those things as an administrator, remembering like, how can I make sure that this doesn't impact the other 2,000 kids on campus? Yeah. Because we went to that school and it was bad when we went there. Yeah. But it didn't feel that. It didn't feel unsafe. Yeah. How can we make this feel as unsafe as possible, even though we're going through all this craziness, right? That's a responsibility. I mean, and you learn those skills. I learned those skills working at Roosevelt. Like there in my principalship, there was rarely anything that happened that I hadn't already been through or experienced in one way or another, right?
Yeah, that's an important lesson too. I learned that. So my first year teaching, I'm a bilingual teacher. I'm at a school in the Northeast, Coker Elementary. I only had 12 students. Oh yeah. I only had 12 students.
That's a dream.
Yeah, it was perfect, right? So I had 4 groups of 3 or whatever, right? And those kids most of them were from Stone Oak, right? I don't know if you know, Sonterra, they call it Sonterre. Like there's just very well-off parents. And education was just a priority. So I didn't have to do a lot. Like looking back as a teacher, I didn't learn a lot and I didn't have to do a lot. Right. I only had one kid fail one of the stars, right? Everyone else took, I helped a little bit, but they literally taught themselves. Yeah. Well, my second year, first grade was also small. So then my second year, we had 2 fourth grade teachers. So then I got moved to second grade, and then the first grade group coming up was small. So I have a small class. Well, before the Labor Day break, they combined classes, and I got shipped to another school. So now I'm at Larkspur over there by Churchill. Title I school. Like I have like 24 kids, so double the kids, and then these kids are, a lot of apartment kids. You're coming from working It's not families. The same. Yeah. It's not the same culture. Right. And so now I'm like, okay. And then at this campus, I never did small group. There was this, it was just like full, it was just
because you were
teaching
already
all the
small
time.
Group.
Yeah. Well, that too. Well, I come to this campus, they're like, okay, we do, for reading, you do your lesson and then you do your small groups, right? And I'm like, small groups? I'm like, what's that? I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was to create station. I didn't know, right? So then I'm like, they're working with me and I'm like, okay, so you know what I did? I created stations. And then so during reading, I'm just like sitting there and just like, okay, go through your stations. That's what I thought smart group. That's what I thought it was.
Yeah.
I didn't know I was supposed to be pulling a group and working on like, okay. So then the principal comes in and he's like, hey, like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, it's reading time. They're going through their station. And then so I'm just like there. So then he has a conversation with me. So he puts me on a growth plan and I'm like, sure. Right.
Yeah.
And then that school, I was there 4 years. That school taught me so much about teaching, like about teaching. In fact, 1 year I taught second grade and this kid comes in and he doesn't know how to read. And I'm like, oh my God, like how do I teach a kid how to read?
Yeah.
So I learned that, like you said, right? Like you just, how do I handle a bomb threat?
Yeah.
If you weren't at that school, you want to learn that. Right. And so I think going back to what your mom tells you, like learning, right? Like sometimes we see difficult things and we're like, while we're going through it, we're like, oh, this sucks, right? But then you get out of it and you're like, man, I learned a lot. And so speaking of, earlier you mentioned your house burning down. How was that? Like I've never known anyone. You're the only person I've known that their house is burned down.
I'm the only person I know whose house is burned down.
So I don't want to leave without you sharing that experience.
Can I tell you that's kind of when everything started to like hit home for me. So backtrack 8 months. I got a divorce, right? And because of my job, because of my career, because of the choices I've made, I was able to go through that divorce and literally, and I don't mean to sound awful, but literally nothing in my life changed.
Wow.
Other than I no longer had a partner. Right. And I remember like I was leaving one morning to go to our principal retreat actually in 2021. And I was backing out and I see everyone's trash cans out. And I was like, I have to take out my own trash. Like, and that's when I lost it. Like, that's when I had my like my moment of like, oh my God, I have to do this alone.
Remind me to tell you my trash story. Go ahead.
It was so crazy. So then I was just like, okay, like this is going to be my new norm. Right.
Yeah.
Well, then my cousin and his wife were going to build a house. And so they had sold their house. But in order to build their house, they had to sell their house. They couldn't like stay in it. And so they were going to get an apartment. And one of my other cousins was like, hey, Alan and Claudia just sold their house. And this is literally 1 week after I kicked out my ex-husband, right?
Oh, wow.
So I called them and I was like, come live with me, you know? And so they
I need someone to take out my trash.
I was like, I need help. I can't do this. And my house was 2,700 square feet. Like, no business, right? House. And so, so they came. So like I was only by myself for 1 week.
Oh, wow.
So they came, they moved in, they had their son and then 2 dogs. So we had 4 dogs collectively.
Yeah.
And they would call it the West Wing, where it was like, because it was like the main part of the house and then all the bedrooms, right? And they were on the West Wing. And so, but that house was separated like that, where like you could have like 2 households living there, like not even.
Wow. Yeah.
And so they were there for 8 months. And so, it would have been longer, but then the house fire happened. So it was like a Sunday. It was a Sunday afternoon, right? Like at the last day of spring break. And Claudia had just had her 30th birthday. So they had friends over the night before and I went to go see Randy Rogers. So like I wasn't really home, but then I got home and people were leaving, cool, whatever. Like, so then the next day, another friend was having a birthday and we went to their brunch, or I went to their brunch. And when I came home, I was like, I'm going to take a nap. And so I laid down and then Claudia and Alan were cleaning the house because they had people over. So they had, the Spanish music going, the windows open, doors open. Alan was cleaning out something in the garage. And then Claudia was sweeping in the kitchen and she just heard like crackling. So she went and she looked out and she's like, Osana, the house is on fire. And I like get out of my bed. I'm like, what? So I felt the need to go look for myself. So I go outside and I see like my porch, my
patio?
Patio was on fire. But I had like a 2-tier deck, right? Okay. So like the bottom was like starting to burn. Oh, and the closest thing right there was my bedroom door. So I was like, the house is on fire. She's like, I told you. So like we start getting the dogs, and we get out. Well, by the time Alan, my cousin, went to go see, comes around, and like now it's hit my house.
Wow.
And my house was all brick except for that back
part. Okay. That's what mine is.
Yeah. And so that caught like that. So Alan runs and he's trying to get the hose and like, right, just, and so like, I don't know how, but some neighbors saw it. They come with their to help, but then it was too late. Yeah. So, we just, we did what we just got the dogs out, and then Alan runs to tell the backyard neighbor about it. They were our friends, the backyard neighbor. And so then the neighbor, like his mind, he tells his wife to get her and the kids out. Yeah. And he asks my cousin, can you help me water the gate?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So then they go and they're just spraying the fence line.
Yeah.
Like who thinks about this stuff? So they're spraying the fence line, and my house was the 7th fire that day. Because it was a very windy day.
Wow.
And so it took the firefighters, I think, 13 minutes to get there, when it probably would have been a quicker response, but they were at another fire.
Wow.
And so my house was completely under fire within 18 minutes. It was a total loss.
18 minutes.
It was a total loss.
Wow.
And so we're just,
that's insane.
And I remember thinking like, everything I've ever worked for is in that house.
Yeah.
Everything is in that house.
Oh, man.
And my cousin Claudia, my cousin's wife Claudia, she, and mind you, like in that house was where the divorce happened, right? Like it was where the cheating happened. It was me not knowing, right? So Claudia, I remember like I started crying and I was like, literally everything I've worked for is burning, right? And I looked at her and I said, like, what did I do to deserve this?
Yeah.
You know? And I'm getting teary.
No, you're good.
So she grabs my hand and she's like, let it burn. Yeah. Let it burn. Yeah. She's like, God is giving you this opportunity to restart your life.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay.
That's awesome.
So, So immediately, the 4 of us, and their son, the 3 of us and their son, like we just got in a circle and we just started praying. So we're praying.
Yeah.
And then we get away from the circle and I go, and like literally the only thing to do was like to watch it burn.
Yeah.
Right. So we're sitting there and this little girl comes up to me and she says, my daddy wanted me to give this to you. And she gives me $2,000 cash. And I said, no, baby, I can't take this. And she's like, no, my dad said. So I said, take me to your dad. So it's just a neighbor. And he's like, look, he goes, I recently went through some things and I obtained some money. Mm-hmm. And he's like, and I promised God that I would give it when I had the opportunity. And he's like, take it.
That's awesome.
And I was like, thank you. Right. So all these signs from God. Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay. And so, I guess for lack of better words, it was an easy like case because it was a total loss. Yeah. So everything was just like, here's the check, right? Because it was a total loss. Like there was nothing to salvage. Yeah. So then I have all of this money and I'm like, what do I do? Yeah. And so, someone on the Facebook, like my neighborhood, had gone through that. And then she put on there, if there's any words of wisdom that I can give you, it's don't make a decision now. Like take your time.
Take a break. Yeah.
Figuring it out. And so I did.
That's
and
smart.
Almost 2 years later is when I built the house. Yeah. And I had 40% to put down. Wow. And so I did that. But when I moved into the house, right, and it's 2,100 square feet, but it felt bigger. Yeah. Right. It was like just a very open floor plan. Yeah. I remember being in the house and feeling accomplished because of the house. But being inside the house and feeling very empty inside. So the insurance like furnished my house. So I felt the need to get a 4-bedroom house just so I could get it fully furnished and paid for. Oh, wow. Because they would only pay for what I got. Yeah. Right. And so I was like, the amount of money I spent on furniture, I would never do that again.
Yeah.
But I didn't pay for it.
Yeah.
So like I was buying all nice things. And so when it was all said and done, I'm like, but it's so empty. Like, yes, this is everything I've worked for.
Yeah.
But like, it's just me.
For what? Yeah.
Right. So for what? And that's when I think, and it was post Uvalde.
Okay.
It was the summer we came back from Uvalde, and things intensified in Texas with safety protocols on campuses. And that became the focus of that year. And I remember thinking like, and I would tell my staff, I told them, this is the way we operate is no longer about our convenience at all. It's about the safety of the campus.
Yeah.
So while it might be convenient for you to hold that door open, holding that door open could literally cost everybody their lives.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I need y'all to get that ingrained. And this is the message I'm giving my staff when we come back from the break.
Wow.
Like, this is what we're starting the school year with, right? We had to undergo new training for lockdowns.
Yeah.
And that's basically like how we started off the school year was just like, like negativity, death, gun violence, like all of these things. Yeah. And I remember telling my staff, like, this is not a part of me that I want to be as a leader where I'm constantly on people's butts about these things. Yeah. But for my own protection, I have to be this way, because if you guys leave a rock by the door, I can lose my job over that rock, over that decision. Mm-hmm. So I now became responsible. And I think in like this magnified way of being more responsible for that's like realizing that one person's decision, a child's decision, right? Mind you, I have 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds on my campus. One child's decision could literally cost me everything I've ever worked for. Yeah. Everything. Because the first person they're going to blame is going to be the principal.
You're in charge.
And when you look at those school shootings, and they always look at how the administration acted in that moment. Yeah. And there's always an opportunity to learn, but in that moment, you're responsible for so many lives. Yeah. And for me, it was 700 lives collectively, right? Me, my little self. Yeah. And then you think like, I didn't sign up for this. Yeah. This is not what I signed up for. And then at the same time, in my personal life, I'm not where I thought I would be at 38 years old, And it's like, if I put all of this stuff on hold, not on hold, but I thought that those were the things that I wanted in my life. Yeah. Like not having kids, right? And I didn't want to have kids because I knew that my career didn't allow for me to be the mom that I wanted to be. And I didn't want to have I didn't want my kids to have the same experience I had growing up with a working mother. But I saw no way around that. Yeah. Because my aspirations drove me. Yeah. So my sacrifice was, well, then I'm not going to have kids. And my ex-husband was okay with that. Yeah. Right. And so when all of that was gone and everything's taken away from you, and you're just like literally starting at like fresh, it's like, man, like, what am I doing with my life? Wow. And then being a principal didn't become so important to me anymore. And it wasn't until Pastor Ed came and talked to us and gave us that message. Yeah. And I was like, here's God talking to me again, right? Like he's telling me like, you think it's your time to go, but it's not. Wow. I chose for you to be here. Yeah. And I'm glad I stayed, because that last year was by far like the best year we had. And it was awesome. Having gone through all of that, and in my personal life, having gone through the challenges that I went through, but being able to escape that for the sake of being there for my school was, I think, what helped me survive all of that. Yeah. Because I had to be present. Yeah. And I'm very, you know me, I'm very, good morning, like, hugging and happy. Yeah. And I couldn't let that go away because I didn't want people to know what I was going through. And I told you earlier, like, I didn't even change my last name until I left. Yeah. Because you're broadcasting that you had a divorce. And it's like, that's so unfair to us to like have to broadcast that. So I kept my last name for 3 more years for the sake of saving face. Yeah. And again, had I not been in that position, I wouldn't have had to gone through that. If I was just a teacher in the classroom, like, yes, you go through the name change, right?
Yeah.
But there's less people to have to announce it to.
Yeah.
Right. For me, it would have been announcing to the community, to my students, to their parents.
Yeah.
Like now everybody knows I got a divorce.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so again, just finishing out the staying one more year and like leaving on a good note versus like desperation versus like just that heavy cloud of Uvalde that Uvalde had on us, that having fun again and teaching the kids with the expectations of like what you expected them, how you expected them to behave, and like being able to celebrate that. Yeah. Like having dances for the simple fact that everybody's behaving, right? And not having to worry about like there's going to be a fight at the dance, right? Yeah. We didn't have any of that. Like we just had fun. Yeah. And so being able to be in that and be like, okay, like we're in a good place. I did what I think I was set out to be, you know, to do. Yeah. And now now I'm in a place where I can step away. I can take this pay cut and kind of figure out like what's next for me. Yeah. Right. And that's awesome. For me. Yeah. And that's it. Yeah. Nothing else. Yeah. Cool, man. Yeah. Well, I think you're going to do great as a consultant. Well, you have the experience, you have the knowledge, and it's like you were being prepared for all of this. Yes, very much. Yeah. Very much. So now you're going to go out there and still make a difference, still make an impact, right? You're making an impact a little farther away from the kids, but all the work that you're doing is going to impact, you know, the leadership, and then it's going to hopefully, you know, drive culture and change and improvements. That's awesome. That's the goal. That's the goal. Very cool. So what advice? Okay, so you haven't started in consulting, right? Not the full on consulting. Yeah. No. Yeah. I have my little cohort that I meet with monthly. Yeah. Of administrators. So I've done some coaching through that, but like the one-on-one, I won't do till we come back in January. Okay. So as far as like advice, someone wanting to take that career path, what, you know, do you have any advice for someone like that? I would say for the administration route, that you have to have a sustainable personal life and a personal life that allows for you to be very present in your administrative job. Yeah. And it's hard to do both. That's actually what my dissertation is on. It's hard to do both, especially as a woman, I think. Yeah. Because if you are a mom, if you are a wife, you have those responsibilities also at home that you kind of take on this like motherly figure at school. Yeah. And like you now have that responsibility as well, right? And so when those kids go home, they're still your responsibility when you're at home with your own family. Yeah. Right? So you have to be in a place where your home life allows for you to do this life. Yeah. Because if you're not, one's going to sacrifice for the other. And if I could tell the 27-year-old me when I started this at Roosevelt, it would be to not put those things on hold for the sake of career advancement. Yeah. I wish I would have done things differently. Yeah. But I don't regret the things that I've done. Yeah. And so if there was some advice, especially as a female in this job, is that there is that expectation of you at home and at work, and you have to learn to balance both in a very healthy way, right? And I think that that's what we sacrifice first is our health. Yeah. And you learn to just be tired all the time. Yeah. And be exhausted and not be happy and you know all these things. You learn to function that way, but that's no way to function. Yeah. Because if you're trying to be your whole self when you're at home, then there has to be a healthy approach to this. Yeah. I would also advise anyone going into administration, because of the way things are now, if you are not happy in the district, if you do not feel supported, go somewhere else. Yeah. You will land in a district that does have the support in place, because that is huge for your everyday operations.
Yeah.
It is huge. I used to think it didn't matter. I would be like, let's just focus about what we're doing.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, all of this other noise coming in where it made it really hard to just focus on your campus, right?
Yeah.
So I would say, go somewhere where you're going to be supported, where you feel like you're being grown.
Yeah.
If that's your aspiration.
Yeah.
And then I guess the other thing too is, like, no matter where you think you are in your career, like you could have it all planned out.
Yeah.
Like things are going to happen in life where God's going to like take a little moment, kind of laugh at you and be like, I have the plans that I have for you. Right. And be okay. Like when those moments happen, like be okay with that moment.
Yeah.
And like sit in that moment for a while, because it's going to be a moment of like your trajectory. Like, so where is this going to take me next?
Yeah.
Whether that's you stay in that position, you go somewhere else, you get a different job, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And I would say really take some time to be in that moment, to be with God about what that next step is. Because I think too often, especially if you're like driven with ambition, that you kind of close those things off.
Yeah.
And then you get to the top and you're like by yourself and you're like, oh, like this is not how I thought this would feel.
Yeah.
Right. Versus getting there and then having to take steps back. So as you're getting there, make sure that you're taking care of yourself along the way. Make sure you're taking care of your responsibilities at home, and make sure that you're sitting in that moment of like, is this what God hasn't, planned for me? Yeah. Listen to those like messages. Like I just, and again, I do think that I'm a true believer that everything happens for a reason. Like my house burning down happened for a reason. Yeah. Me being in this position, I honestly believe that me being a principal and I feel successful in my position. Yeah. And being empathetic in my leadership was what helped me survive the last 4 years. Because a lot came with that too, right? Yeah. And so if it hadn't been for that, I don't know how I would have came out of all of that. Yeah. Because there was a level of preparation. Yes. Going through. Yes. Yeah. And knowing that, like, as much as I wanted to stay in bed and cry, I had to get up. I had to look professional. Yeah. Go to work and be there. Be very present. Yeah. Be very present, because you have to be very alert. Yeah. To be very present and very alert every single day for the 700 people that I was responsible for. Yeah. And knowing that that's where I needed to be. And I needed to be in a good headspace for that. That's cool. So I don't know that I have words for it about like necessarily like a statement. No, I think that's good advice. I think, along the way, like you said, right? I think the key word that I heard was like health, like healthy, doing things in a healthy way. Because like if you hyper focus on anything and make that the most important thing, that can be unhealthy in anything that you pursue. Right? Like if you're like, I want to be a mom and that's all I want to do. Like that can be unhealthy. Or I want to have kids and this is all I want to do. Or I want to do that, right? I want to be a professional sports, right? Like soccer player, like, and that's all I want. Like there's unhealthy ways to pursue anything. Right. Right. But at the end of the day, like you said, there's a lot of people that are unfulfilled at those doing these things because they didn't do it in a healthy way. Right. There's a thing my pastor always says. He says, healthy things grow. Right. And so, you think about something that you want to grow, you nurture it, you put it in the right environment, you feed it things that it needs to grow, and it'll grow. Success comes. Right. Right. It's just a part of, if you do this right, like that's success. Right. Right. And then our stories are, some of what we pursued was that,
hearing from our parents, like, cause like my parents, right? Like we came to the United States to give you an opportunity. Okay. So now I feel an obligation, like, oh man, I have to be like wildly successful. Like my parents struggled.
Yeah.
Like my dad, I want to interview my dad. My dad has
a pressure there.
Yeah. My dad has a story. He told me one time that when he first became a janitor, he didn't have anywhere to live. And so we were in Mexico. My dad's working. He had to like work and establish himself before we could come.
Right.
He would sleep in the library. He would come. He was the night janitor. So he'd come in the afternoon and then he'd clean everything. And then he was in charge of locking up. So he would lock up and he'd go sleep in the library. And then before the morning janitor came in, like at 5 or 6 in the morning, my dad would wake up, he'd lock up, and then he'd go to a restaurant and hang out until. And I'm like, man, my dad did that so that I could come here. Yes. And so I'm like, I can't just be a teacher. Like, like I've got to do something big and I've got to like, Yeah. But now looking back and I'm like, you know what? Success isn't this financial thing. No. Right? Success is a lot of things. And one of those is finding your purpose and finding where you fit. Right? And so I think it worked out for me through the mentoring of a lot of different people. Yeah. Like I'm still finding, right? Like what I do, I don't define myself by my career. Yeah. And so good. I think
that's healthy.
Yeah.
That's healthy.
But the same like when I was a teacher and then my siblings are engineer, like there was this time where I would compare myself, like my brother's an electrical engineer. He makes a lot of money. He travels, right? He whenever he goes on vacation, he takes my parents. I'm not able to do any of those things, right? And so there was this like, I would compare myself. Now I'm at a point where I'm like, you know what? Like we're different people. Yeah. Like he's successful. Now it's funny. He had kids older. He focused on career. My kids are actually older than his kids, even though he's 7 years older than me. Yeah. So he'll call me about stuff. Yeah. Like, hey, my daughter, like we're thinking about getting her a phone. Yeah. Like what has your experience been? So now I'm able to teach him because I've been a parent longer. And so I think outside of consulting, I think the life that you've lived, you have so much to offer people, women, so much to offer just people in general. Like, hey, like, it's good to be ambitious, but man, doing it the right way, right, is so important because a lot of we don't in my experience within our culture, like we don't teach our kids like you said, the reality of the situation, right? Like we just like, well, this is what it means. This is what I want for you. Yes. And that's my parents were like, I don't want you to struggle financially. Yes. So do everything that you can to not struggle financially. But then it's like, well, is that really the most important thing? Right. And if I don't make a lot of money, can I still be content, still be happy, still be fulfilled? Not struggle. Yeah. Yeah. And
you can.
You can. Yeah. You can. Yeah. My wife and I lived on a teacher income for 12 years. We had 4 kids. We bought a house. Part of that was we didn't have any debt. Right. We didn't have credit cards. Our only debt was our mortgage. Right. And so we were able to live on a teacher's income and have 4 kids and have a house but you won't hear that from immigrant parents. No. They're like, no, that's not success. Right. I look back at my parents and I'm like, you guys were wildly successful. You raised 5 children, 2 engineers. All of us went to college. My parents were janitors, both of them. And I'm like, you guys were successful. Like, you're not going to tell anyone, hey, go be janitors. And, that's not something to esteem. But I'm like, but you guys were successful. Yeah. Like, you're not rich, but man, like, if there's people that tell me, like, man, what did your parents do? Yeah. And I'm like, go ask them. Yeah. Yeah. But so yeah, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about success. I learned a lot about doing things right, being healthy, taking care of yourself. All those things are very, very, very important. So
they are, and they're easily forgotten. Yeah, when you get caught up in the drive.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of people just they focus on something and they're just like, whatever it takes, right? Whoever I hurt to get there, however I hurt myself to get there. And then, like you said, you get there and you're like,
you're like, man, this isn't what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. I'll end with this quote. There's a quote that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Amen.
And so I think, you know, building relationships and the humanity of any career, right? Any career, there's like, we're working with people, right?
Like real people going through real things.
Yeah, kids are people, teachers are people, principals are people, coaches are people. Like every job you've had, like it's the reality of people's personal lives, the reality of things that you struggle through. Yeah, I think it's good to have people in leadership that recognize that. Because, if you work for someone that doesn't recognize that, I had a principal once that didn't recognize that. And it was the worst. It was my worst year teaching. She was brand new to the school. So she wanted to come in with like, you know, I'm in charge. And so my first encounter with her was my kids got let out late for lunch. So then we had recess right after lunch. We're at recess late because we got out late. Well, she goes in my classroom. I'm out there. She comes to the playground. She's like, hey, weren't you in your classroom? I was like, oh, well, the kids got left out late. So I started the 15 minutes when we got here. She's like, well, you're cutting into educational time or instructional time. Like, so she wrote me up. I was like, okay, she wrote me up. My second experience with her, we had, what was that? There's like a charity that everyone gives to, United Way fundraiser. I was one of only 2 teachers that didn't give. I put 0 and I never give. Okay. Because my wife and I give through other avenues. Right. Okay. She comes into my classroom. I'm doing a writing lesson. And she's like, you owe me $1. And I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, you owe me $1. She's like, we need to get 100% on the United Way giving. And I'm like, no. And then she's like, here's what. I'll give $1 and then you can just pay me back later. And I'm like, I'm not comfortable. This is in front of the students. I'm like, I'm not comfortable with that. She goes, okay, well, during your conference period, come to my office. Okay. So I go to her office and she gives me a pamphlet and she gives me this story about how when she was growing up, the Ronald McDonald House helped her. So that's where she gives. And all these organizations are doing a lot of great things. And I'm like, okay, that's great. But my wife and I, we give through other avenues and we just decided not to give here. So she was just very, you know, like, I want to look good. I want to get the golden apple. They get like an apple or something. Yes, like she wanted to.
There's a lot of pressure.
It was just but she wanted to like the visual of everything, right? And I'm like, oh man, I hate it. So then I ended up like going to the district, telling them about this. Like she's trying to get $1 from me, whatever. So then, like you said, right? I have a bunch of like days, right? So I'm like, I'm just gonna start taking days off. Well, then she pulls me into your office. She's like, what does your wife do for work? And I'm like, oh, she's a stay-at-home mom. She goes, so then why are you missing so many days? And I'm like,
why does it matter?
Why does it matter? Like, yeah, like why does it matter? And she's like, if your wife is at home, like you shouldn't be missing so many days. Like, why are you taking so many personal days? And I'm like, what the heck is this? You know, like it was just very unhealthy. So I ended up getting out of there, thankfully. But yeah, it was the worst year.
It's stories like that make me feel like, okay, then I hope I did a good job, right? Because like United Way was one of the things where I remember my superintendent was like, hey, your school used to get 100%. And I'm like, yes, sir. But they used to be like scared to not give, right? Yeah. That's just not who I am. Like, I'm not going to force people to donate if they don't want to. Yeah. But that is a big deal. And then the district makes a big deal about 100% participation and genes and this and that. And I'm like, I'm just not that person. I'm not going to make them and I'm not going to pretend that we're there either, you know? And then the other thing too with absences, like I told my staff, I don't have to report to you when or why I take a day off.
Yeah.
And I don't expect the same from you.
Yeah.
So I don't need an explanation.
No.
Make sure you code it correctly. Make sure you have your documentation. That's it.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell me why.
Yeah.
And I remember that first year, like COVID, right? And so we would have to take off because if you were exposed, whatever, all those things. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, this is so personal to be like, I went to have dinner with a friend and now she has COVID, so I may have been exposed. It's like you're just giving people like all of this personal information, and then HR would be like, "How long did you sit? Did y'all get close? Did you do?" You know, and you're just yes, but it's because of COVID, right?
Yeah.
But I remember feeling so like get out of my business, like you know,
yeah,
and not wanting for me to ever go through that again, but also like my staff, and so I would tell them like I don't need to know. Like, I remember when I first got there, they would write this whole paragraph about why they had to take this day off.
Oh, wow.
And I'd be like, it's okay. Like, it's your personal time. And then sick. I can't dictate whether you're sick or not.
Yeah.
Cough, cough. You're sick. Okay, cool. Like, that's not, and I just was not that person.
Yeah.
Also, though, I learned to, like, because it's so hard to do the home life and the teacher life, I would tell my staff, like, if you can find coverage for something, we will make it work, but we're not going to inconvenience people to do it. And we're not going to keep the kids from learning. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So a lot of my teachers, their kids went to Harlandale schools. So it'd be like, hey, my daughter's having a performance, go. Right. Like, how do we keep this going while you're able to go do that? That was my big thing. Yeah. But it wasn't a big issue for me. And that's like when we had work days, maybe we weren't supposed to have kids at the campus. But my paraprofessionals, because we had like this really good culture, they didn't have that much work to do. So they'd be like, I'll sit in the library with the kids. Cool. So we put a movie on so the teachers could bring their kids so that I could have my teachers at the meetings. We could sit down and talk data. They could plan. And they knew their kids were being taken care of, because the alternative was they were going to call in and stay home with their kids. Someone has to. I do know that what's really been popping up lately, and that now that I've been gone, is that the person who took over is completely different than me. Oh, wow. And I actually ran into a teacher yesterday at church. So I got baptized yesterday. Oh, congratulations. And 2 people behind me was one of my former teachers. Yeah. And I was like, Anissa. So we're like hugging. And I was like, congratulations. She's like, you too. And then she like pulled me back and she's like, we miss you so much. Yeah. And her eyes got water. I was like, don't make me cry. And I was like, because I can't go back. I can't. Yeah. And so she was like, we miss you so much. And we're so sorry that like we didn't appreciate you more when we had you. And you know, this. And I said, y'all did. Like, y'all were fabulous. She's like, we miss you. She's like, it's awful. And I was like, well, I'm going to keep praying for y'all. Like, you'll get through this. But like, again, we have so much going against us that it's like, it really, at the leadership position, especially at the principalship, like you are the one person that can determine how your teachers, how your staff feels. Yeah, you create the culture. You create the culture. Yeah. And that's a big responsibility. And then if they're happy to be there, then your kids are going to be happy to be there. Yeah. You know? But man, and it blows my mind that there are people in those leadership roles that don't get that. Like, I'm like, how are you here and you don't have that innately within you, you know? Yeah.
I think part of that is just, you know, learning from people like you. Yeah.
It really is.
I learned that from a friend of mine who has, and this is just a little related. I was asking him about training, like soccer, right? I'm like, yeah, my sons, you know, they're left-footed. I want them to, you know, just get better. His son's a little older. And he's like, well, it depends. He goes, the training depends on how far they want to go. He said they want to go. And I was like, I've never asked my sons, like, what do you want to do with soccer, right? Like, because my wife and I know, like, you know, what I would like for them to just make their high school team, because it's very competitive. I would love to go to see them play high school. Right. College, I'm like, if you play soccer in college, cool. If not, cool. Yeah. But I'm like, I've never asked them. And it's their life, you know, like it's their life. Like, what do you want? Like, do you just, you know?
Is it just for fun? Or do you really want to get good?
Even now, like, do you still like it? Do you want to be on the team? Right? Like, we just, ever since they were little, it's just like, you're going to play soccer. And every year the season starts and we're like, yeah, we pay and we sign them up and we take them. And it's like, I've never asked, like, do you still want to do this? Like, you know, just little stuff like that, right? Like, just understanding, like, okay, I'm the principal, I'm in charge, but like, this is your classroom and this is your students and you're like, it's very, very important to understand that aspect of who you're leading and how you're leading. And so, cool. I love it. I learned a lot from you. All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you guys for tuning in to My Line of Work. If today's story inspired or intrigued you, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode. If there's a career you are curious about, drop it in the comment. We'd love to feature it. Hasta la próxima.
Bye.